and greenhouse gas emission reduction targets and reducing fertilizer usage by 20% to improving farm nitrogen efficiency. The Fertilizer Association was formed over 50 years ago, and its mission statement is to promote the efficient use of fertilizers to produce quality food in an economic and environmentally sustainable manner. I believe this mission statement is as relevant today as it was back in 1968. For sure, back in the 60s and 70s, the questions were quite different. But since then, we have learned a lot about fertilizers and how they work under Irish conditions. We continue on this road to use all applied nutrients as efficiently as possible. Over the coming years, we will have to adopt and evolve to manage climate change and to deal with new policies such as the Green Deal and Farm to Fork, and implement new nutrient regulations. I believe we are very well positioned to deal with these challenges head on. We can farm in a sustainable manner as we have tried and tested technologies and continue to research new technologies to become more carbon efficient while using applied nutrients more efficiently. Today we have three excellent speakers here to give us an insight into the challenges that we face into the future and how we can change and implement new technologies on farm to become more nitrogen efficient. Please ask questions during the presentations on the Q&A tab function, and we will try answer as many as we can before the end of the webinar. We will also run a number of audience polls during the seminar to get your thoughts on particular aspects of nutrient management. You will also qualify for 15 IASIS points after today's webinar. I will now hand you over to our chairperson for the afternoon, Dr. Siobhan Walsh, newly appointed Sustainability Correspondent with the Irish Farmers Journal. Thank you. Over to you, Siobhan.
Hi Mark, thanks for the introduction. Good afternoon everybody, and welcome to the Fertilizer Association of Ireland's Spring Scientific Meeting for 2021. And as Mark said, very appropriately titled A New Era in Nutrient Management, and that's certainly what we're entering into. I suppose at this stage, we'd usually all be in horse and jockey and settle down comfortably awaiting the presentations, but regardless of venue, we still have the usual topical and extremely interesting lineup of speakers. A bit of housekeeping first. So we have three speakers today. Jack Nolan of the Department of Agriculture with responsibility for nitrates. William Burchill, who's a Teagasc advisor based in Moorepark. He's going to tell us about tactics to reduce our nitrogen use. And very importantly, Donal Sheehan will give the farmer's perspective and talk about how he's reducing nitrogen on his farm. After each speaker, there'll be time for questions, and then at the end we'll have a roundup with a panel discussion, and we'll have more times for questions then. So we really want the audience to participate here. You see a question and answers tab at the bottom of your screen, as Mark said, and any questions that you have at all, please put them in and we'll try to get through as many of them as possible. We also want to hear your views, so we're going to run 3 polls throughout the presentations, one before each presenter, and we'll have the results at the end. So we might actually start with a poll there. So Liam is working away there in the background. So Liam might bring up the poll before we bring on Jack Nolan for his presentation. So the first poll is: at what stages during the growing season do you see an opportunity to reduce nitrogen fertilizer use? So is it in early spring, at the back end, so August or September? Are you going to account for your slurry nitrogen and reduce your artificial nitrogen? Or are you not going to reduce anything at all? So we'll give the answer to the poll at the end of Jack's presentation. So while Jack is getting ready there, I might just tell you a bit about him. So Jack is a senior inspector with the Department of Agriculture. He has responsibility for water quality, nitrates and biodiversity. And Jack is going to talk to us today about fertiliser use and the Green Deal. So we all know that the farm to fork strategy requires us to reduce our fertiliser use by 20%. So Jack's going to give us an insight into where the department sees this going. So I might hand over to you, Jack.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, Siobhan. Thanks very much to the Fertilizer Association for inviting me. Everybody's heard of the Green Deal. So this is a target or a strategy by the EU that by 2050, the EU will be the first continent to be climate neutral. You know, that we won't be having an impact on the environment. It's aiming to have economic growth decoupled from resource use, and that no place or people will be left behind. And a big thing about this Green Deal, and probably about when you see something about the environment, is that people often feel threatened. And I don't think we should. There's part of us that should say, there's an opportunity here. Like, it is a challenge, definitely. Sorry, I'm trying to move on slides here at the minute. It is a challenge, but we should see it as an opportunity. We export about 13 billion worth of product every year out of Ireland, about over 4 billion worth of dairy product. And the people that are buying this, the consumers, want to know that what we're selling them is the real deal, that we can stand behind our environmental credentials. This year we have the nitrates review, and that's looking at water quality across the country and what farmers can do. And we know that over the last number of years, there's been a lot of intensification in certain parts of the country. And we know that this is having an impact on water quality. Now, people might say, look, 20 years ago, we had the same number of stock, and we did, but they weren't all localised, or they weren't all in the Golden Vale or the southeast of the country. And that's what's been happening over the last few years. So we have 50% of the expansion in dairy cow numbers, for example, taking place in Cork, Tipperary and Kilkenny. And that is having an impact on water quality. And when we take actions in the future, these actions will have to be targeted. Like, there's no point in asking somebody, say, up in Roscommon or Mayo, to cut back fertilizer and expect that to have an impact in an area that's already very intensive. So targeted measures are going to be key in the future. We also know that there are parts of the country where phosphorus loss is an issue, and that we're going to have to do more there. So every farmer is going to be asked to do something. But we know that lime sales, and I'm sorry my presentation isn't working here, lime sales peaked in the early 1980s at about 2 million tonnes. And since then they've been sliding downwards, and they're only at about 900,000 or 1 million tonnes at the moment. And the economic return on lime is 7 to 1. So if you spend €1,000 on 50 tonnes or like 40 tonnes of lime this year, it costs about 22 or 3 euro per tonne to spread it. You're going to get a return because you're not going to have to feed as much concentrates because your grass is going to grow. It's also going to make your nitrogen and phosphorus much more efficient. Like, there was a presentation by...
Jack, if you want to take down your presentation, I can bring it in from this end here, okay? So if you...
Okay.
So
can you bring it in there now?
Yeah, you just give me a second now and I'll bring in your presentation. So keep chatting and I'll bring it up here.
Just while Liam's doing that, like, if we look at nitrogen sales have increased over the last number of years, and they haven't increased uniformly across the country. We know that we have legal limits for nitrogen and phosphorus, and the majority of people comply with it, but some don't. So what's being investigated at the moment is the possibility of a chemical fertilizer register, so that when a farmer buys fertilizer, it'll be linked to his herd number. There's a huge opportunity around the level of nitrogen being applied. Like, there's been a number of webinars recently by Pasture Base, and it shows that, I'm on the second or third one now, Liam, it shows that people that are measuring grass have much more control. The next one, please. People that are measuring grass have much more control over their fertilizer application. And Deirdre Hennessy gave a presentation there last week, and she said, if you're taking out bales of silage on every rotation, or sorry, every time you're grazing, you know that you're putting out too much nitrogen. And where there's a huge opportunity here, if you see that nitrogen use has increased, but phosphorus and potassium haven't increased. And this is a real problem in that, or an opportunity. So soils are imbalanced. And it's not just, when we talk about fertilizers, we always talk about nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. But what about all the trace elements are there? What about major elements like sulfur? Things like boron, things like molybdenum, things like copper. Like, when you take a soil sample, and hopefully all of you are taking soil samples and using them, what do you look for? Like, are you looking to buy a balanced fertilizer to meet the needs of the crop And whether you're a grass or tillage farmer, grass is a crop, or you're doing something for compliance, because Teagasc work previously showed that about 60% of samples were put in a drawer when you got home. Do you do tissue analysis if you're a tillage farmer? Because the Green Deal and the Farm to Fork say that we want to reduce fertiliser use by 20% by 2030, but we don't want to have a negative impact on soil fertility. And that's actually an opportunity in Ireland, because soil fertility here as regards agronomic output, we know that only about 20% of soils have the right pH and the right P and K levels. The same thing when you're applying slurry. I don't know about the part of the country you're in, but wherever I was, there was an awful lot of slurry being spread over the closed period. And this points to a major issue with slurry storage, that we've had an expansion in animal numbers, but now people didn't invest in the tanks, so they're dumping the slurry. Because if you spread slurry in November and December, when there's no growth and the soil is wet, or it might be dry, or it might be frosty for the day or two you're going to get out, well then that's going to end up in a water course or lost to the environment. We need a huge push around investment in slurry storage. At the moment, the nitrates review is ongoing, and one of the issues that keeps coming up is slurry storage and proper enforcement of the regulations that we have. Because we have very good regulations, but we should value slurry. We should be getting it out as early as the soil allows and that there's growth, and we should be using low emission equipment. Ideally, all slurry in Ireland would be going out with low emission equipment, and it'd be going out early in the year. And early in the year depends on your location around the country. It depends on the type of soil on your farm, and you'll know that much better than me. Anyone that's going out giving advice to farmers should be taking account of the fact that anyone that's putting out early nitrogen, up to 20% of that will still be available for silage. Like we see people there with problems trying to make silage because there's high nitrate levels in it. There's huge opportunities to make savings there. If you cut back by 20 kilos per hectare or 16 units, about 20 units an acre on nitrogen, you're saving about 16 units per acre over the whole farm. Just on to the next slide, Liam, please. On the next slide here, this is the regional intensification I was talking about. And we can argue about this afterwards if you want, or like sometimes I put up a quote saying, just open your mind a little bit. I'll learn from you. Maybe you'll see something here of interest. But these areas in orange are majorly, or the majority of the derogation farms are down here. And these are the problems where there's increasing losses of nitrogen. And there needs to be more done here. And these areas will be targeted in the next nitrates action programme. But luckily, farmers are only operating at about 24% nitrogen use efficiency. And the aim should be to get that up into the mid-30s at least. You know, there are things you can do that William is going to talk about, like clover, low emission slurry spreading, timing your nitrogen right. Just because your neighbour is going out with nitrogen application doesn't mean that you should. But if you look at the yellow figures here, you'll see that 9% of the farmers in Ireland control now 33% of the bovine livestock. So there's been huge intensification. So these farmers have a lot to offer. The farmers in the blue areas of the country are probably more extensive, but there are issues there around sediment and phosphorus. And again, look at this from a positive point of view. We would very definitely be in the top third of Europe as regards water quality, maybe even better. But if we can improve on where we are today as regards water quality, it'll give us a competitive advantage. And that's what we want, because we want to be seen as a premium product. We supply about 12% of the infant milk formula in the world. We want to keep doing that. We want to get a premium back to farmers. Just on the next slide, Liam, please, I just touch on biodiversity. Because you may say, why am I bringing up biodiversity? Agriculture makes up 2/3 of the land area of Ireland, and everything you do on that land has an impact. And in the next nitrates review, the Commission have said we must deal with ammonia, which comes from the loss of nitrogen. And that has a significant impact. Again, what we need to do is protect what we have and improve it. We've been fantastic at planting new hedgerows, planting new trees and so on. We need to protect what we have and we need to improve it. I think over the lockdown that we've been in now since March, or on and off anyway, there's a growing appreciation of nature. But we need to understand more about it. And a key thing that we're not doing enough about, and again, there's huge scope here, is around the area of soil science. Because a lot of times we're disguising an inadequacy or a lack of understanding on our behalf. And by us now, I mean you in industry, farmers, us as policymakers. We don't do enough about soil. Soil is responsible or holds about 1/3 of the biodiversity on Earth. And if it's not functioning correctly, the fertilizers that you apply, the bagged fertilizers that you apply, can't work and are going to cost you money. Like, when is the last time you went out into the field with a spade and dug up a sod just to see what kind of structure you have out there. And what can you do about it? Are you staying off it at times of the year that you shouldn't be on it as regards trafficability? Are you minding it as regards poaching? What type of nutrients are you feeding it? Are you giving it slurry and dung and farmyard manure? Are you rotating those around the yard? And are you looking at around the fields? Are you looking at the trace elements? Have you activity in the soil? Have you earthworms in the soil? Because it's so important. We look for the soil to grow a crop, to filter water, to store carbon. You know, there's much more talk now about sequestration of carbon and farmers being paid. But what are we actually doing to mine soil health? There's a chart there called Mulder's chart. We had a talk with a colleague from Base Ireland there a little while ago, and he pointed out all the interactions between these different micronutrients. Like, what are we doing about that, and what are we talking to farmers about? But 50% of global GDP is related to biodiversity. And everything we do for nature should start with biodiversity. Just on the next slide there, Liam, please. So the new green architecture obviously is going to do a lot about nature and help us reaching our targets. But a key thing here that you can see up on the left-hand side are the farm advisory services. And really it should be knowledge sharing, not knowledge transfer. Like if you go back, I think we used to do much more about soil science when our tractors weren't as strong and chemical fertilizer wasn't as freely available or wasn't as cheap. I know fertilizer is going up by maybe 20, 30 euro a tonne at the minute. You'll know better than me when you go to buy it or if you're selling it. But it's still cheap, and it's too cheap because it's letting us waste it. If fertilizer was dearer, we'd take more care with it. We'd use it better. We'd put it out when we need it, at times a year when we need it. Like, I work in a section in the department where people ring giving out about slurry spreading dates and so on. Nobody ever rings to say, I want to spread 10, 10, 20 in December because there's good hard frost and I'll be able to travel on the land, because they know it's of no value. And the same thing has to apply here. This knowledge that we have in farm advisory services. Usually when we talk about this, we just talk about the advisors that are dealing with farmers, and people think of advisors that are drawing up nutrient management plans or submitting forms to the department. But what about the people that are working in the co-ops or the merchants, and when me or you go in, they're telling us what to do, or the fella in the yard that's saying what your neighbour did? We need to share knowledge between us, and we need to see that if the fellow down the road is spreading slurry in the middle of winter, he's not just doing harm, or she is not just doing harm to themselves. They're doing harm to Ireland Inc. or Ireland Incorporated, because others are looking in at us and they're going to point out we're not doing what we're saying on the tin. We're not living up to our credentials in Origin Green. And that's what's so important. We also need industry to row in here behind this. The push for environmental sustainability. There should be, and Donal is going to talk about it, there should be a reward coming back to farmers for farming in a sustainable manner. Like, we've pushed farmers down the road of intensification through lowering food prices. 30 years ago, the average household in Ireland spent 28% of their household budget per month on food. Today, it's around 14%. And then we wonder what's gone wrong. So everybody has to row in here, but of particular importance is sharing knowledge. And on to the last slide, Liam, please. Just to leave you with this slide here, when you look around it, all these things work together. But up there on the left-hand side are farmers, and they're the most important thing here. Particularly, you need to think at this time of year when you're making decisions for the year ahead about your own health and safety. What are you doing as regards fertilizer? Are you looking at crude protein in the meal that's coming on to your farm? How are you going to become more efficient? And how are you going to reduce your impact onto the environment? Because there is a huge appetite out there for environmentally friendly or sustainable food. And we can do it here in Ireland. But it'll take the whole sector to change. And that includes the people that are going to sell fertilizer, the people that are selling spray. So when you're going out there, are you on commission? Obviously, a lot of you are. How are you going to deal with this? I'm asking you to reduce the amount of nitrogen you're going to sell. But there's no limit on looking at soil, looking at the phosphorus, looking at potassium, getting that right, looking at the micronutrients, specialising in soil, getting it working properly. And we can and will, I believe, meet the targets of the European Green Deal. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Jack. Really interesting presentation. And look, you said something very important there to start. Sorry, my video's not started. We've to see this as an opportunity, and that's what this is. You know, if we're reducing fertilizer on farms, we're reducing our input costs, but we have to find a way to reduce that fertilizer while not impacting on our profitability on farms. There's a good few questions in here, Jack, and actually we might just go to the poll if Liam has the poll ready. We might just see if attitudes are changing out there. So if the poll results are in, we asked at what stage during the growing season do you see the opportunity to reduce nitrogen fertilizer? So 2% anyway say they're not going to reduce it at all. There's a big bet on slurry there, 60% account for slurry in, and then nearly the same reducing nitrogen in the early part of the year, the back end of the year. What do you think of those results, Jeff?
I genuinely think it's really positive, and I think farmers themselves are leading the way on this. Like, whether I go out today when it's soaking wet out here, or go out, say, in 2 weeks' time when I'm going to get the value of the slurry, it's going to cost me the same money. Every time you start the tractor, it costs you money. And we've invested hugely in low emission slurry spreading equipment over the last couple of years. And sometimes you'll see statements that farmers have invested, but that's also supported by the taxpayer. And I think people see now it's time to start giving back. And that's around your social license and protecting the environment. You know, and that's the way farming has to be seen. Farmers are, it's probably a bit trite to say it, but custodians of the environment, and people like a nice working environment. And knowing the water quality in your area and protecting it, I think it should be a badge of honour that you're using less nitrogen. You're saving money, you're trialling things like clover, looking at multi-species grassland. Sorry, I don't mean to be stealing William's presentation, but there's huge opportunities here that they don't have these opportunities in confined systems like in Holland and Denmark and so on, that are our competitors. You know, so we should take advantage of it and market the idea that we can feed grass, but we have to measure it. We can feed grass, we can produce this quality product, and we can protect the environment.
And what do you think of that 2% there, Jack? The 2% that said they're not going to reduce it at all. Now, maybe that 2% aren't the most intensive farmers in the world, but is everybody going to have to do something?
I think everyone should aim to contribute, and maybe the 2% are something that people like me will deal with through regulation, Siobhan, I don't know. But we are, like, everybody should be trialling a reduction in nitrogen this year, because next year, not to preempt the nitrates review, but, you know, there will be a reduction in nitrogen allowances. And the amount doesn't matter. You have to start trialling it now. Can you save even a unit per round in the summer? Can you save a little bit on the silage? Like I talked about Deirdre there, Deirdre said in the summer you can cut back to 9 kilos per hectare if you have clover in the sward. So there's huge opportunities. And to look at this the other way around, 98% said they are going to cut back, and that's what we should focus on, the 98%.
Yeah, very true. There's a good few questions coming in. Why is there so much advice on protected urea and so little on balanced nutrition? Jack, you spoke a bit about that there, but there is a huge, you know, there's a big focus on protected urea in our ag climatize and in the farm to fork.
I suppose we're changing all the time. Protected urea is one of the major options in the MAC curve there, you know, to reduce losses and deal with ammonia. 99.5% of ammonia losses come from agriculture. Protected urea and low emission slurry spreading. But I think it's time we refocus, and I think there's an opportunity to refocus. But you must remember that people are busy out there, whether they're selling fertilizer or trying to give advice or fill in forms to submit to the department. So we probably need a training and an upskilling program around this. Like you said there at the start, this is worth 15 IASIS points, and that's for those people that sell crop protection products. But we end up with much more fertilizer in our waters. Like, maybe people wouldn't like it, but should we have IASIS points for people selling fertilizer? So that when the likes of me go into the co-op or the merchant, we're going to be given top-notch soil advice. But again, I'd see there's huge opportunity there around soils. There's people like David Wall down in Fiona Brennan and colleagues down in Johnstown Castle. There's Base Ireland, there's the new EIP project. There's an awful lot of work going on and great scope for improvement. That's the positive thing here.
Yeah. Someone's asking you to comment, Jack, about making use of your soil sampling results to make fertilizer slurry and lineman decisions. So that's obviously a huge part you said about people soil sampling. Is soil sampling going to be something from the department that's going to, you know, there was talks of funding for soil sampling and early on in the play? Yeah,
there's 10 million there allocated for soil sampling, and that programme will roll out later on in the year, and it'll be looking at much more than phosphorus, potassium and lime, you know, because we want to see Where are we with carbon levels? Where are we with trace elements and so on? So there'll be more publicity around that when we get to it. At the moment, people making best use of it should be saying, where am I going to put my slurry based on this? Obviously, if you're stuck for storage, if you had to spread in the last month because you're stuck for storage, you know it's something you need to do. You know, you need to make a plan around it. But everything you do, so we're focusing on slurry. What about a tillage farmer? Are they going to use crop rotation? Are they going to put in cover crops over the winter to nearly feed the soil, you know, to get things going? Because there's an awful lot of things we can do. And we take about 150,000 soil samples every year, which is the same as 600,000 hectares. That's a massive amount of information. And when you look at the chart, I know you couldn't see it there, but it was the third slide. And the amount of P and K that we're selling, it doesn't add up. Like, we're not using the soil samples properly, because if we were, we wouldn't have the deficiencies that we have.
Yeah, isn't it 20% of our soils aren't at optimum fertility, whether it's lime or P and K. Someone's asking here, is there a possibility that we could see the reintroduction of a subsidy on lime?
I suppose lime is identified in the programme for government, that there should be a liming programme. I think lime is like putting engine oil into a car. Do you know, should we really be paid for that? Like, there are other things out there that need a push maybe, but lime should be one of the basic things that you do as a good farmer, as a good soil manager. If you wanted to say to yourself, how am I going to improve my soil and save money? The first thing you do is spread lime. So personally, I don't think it should be mandated, but that's just my personal opinion. It's not department policy. I think it's something that should be done as a matter of course. There should be a huge focus. Since Teagasc started the campaign back in 2016, things have improved, but I'd see other things that are more difficult out there that will have to be done that should be granted rather than lime.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, and lime, as you say, it's the basis for everything. If you don't have your pH right, none of your nutrients are going to be used efficiently. Here's one now. You talked about the different areas of intensity in the country and the different numbers of livestock. Will there be a stocking rate limit introduced in the intensive areas of the country, or I suppose maybe on the intensive farms?
These intensive areas, I suppose, like, there's a couple of things here. There's critical source areas probably on every farm. So these are areas of the farm that are wetter and more likely to lose nutrients. So every farmer needs to take care around that. And then we have some catchments across the country where the EPA are going to provide us with data that are overloaded with nutrients. Now, whether a limit has to come there specifically for those, or more measures have to come that other farmers don't have to take, there will have to be action in those areas. And these are identified in the CAP Strategic Plan recommendations for Ireland that were published by the Commission before Christmas. And they have them in other countries, like they're there in Flanders and so on, and people say, we're not as intensive as that, but we have some very intensive catchments. And yes, there will have to be more actions there, with a strong focus on slurry storage, chemical fertilizer usage, and enforcement of the regulations. Like, we have good regulations, so proper enforcement of them will bring us a long way. But if you're in those areas, you should be making sure that you're on side with the current regulations.
Yeah. Okay, I'm kind of jumping back a bit now with this one, and this is the last question I'll ask you until the panel discussion, Jack, but there's an interesting one here, and you're talking about balancing soils. Should we be selling products with less N and the same P and K levels? So it seems like a simple answer to a complicated.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and I should have said it. There's about 1.5 million tonnes sold with nitrogen in it, 500,000 tonnes straight nitrogen, 500,000 tonnes with high nitrogen over 20%. And then the others are products like 18, 6, 12 or 10, 10, 20. So definitely there's an opportunity there to reduce the nitrogen, increase or at least hold the P and K, and also look at other nutrients that are there. But that, like, if you're thinking today, how am I going to keep selling my fertilizer? Reduce the amount of N in it. There's still a huge demand for P and K and balanced nutrition. So yeah, I'd support that. And I think there's an appetite out there for it as well.
Yeah, I suppose it's not as simple as just saying reduce the N and increase the P and K. We should look at everything in a whole, but it's definitely one approach to go to, isn't it? It's a start.
You have to have a plan, and William, I think, will give you a plan, and Donal will tell you through how you live the plan. But there's huge, like all the research that's been funded in Ireland and all the gains that are being made. Like, surely we're not going to thumb our nose at it and say, no, we're going to keep doing what we did 40 years ago.
Yeah.
Like, I know what my father did 40 years ago. I don't do the same thing. And hopefully my children won't do the same thing. We have to adapt and change with the times. That's how industry strives. We get more information, we change. And we're using too much nitrogen, so we have to change.
Yeah. Okay, Jack, we'll give you a breather. There's plenty more questions there to come back to for the panel discussion, and we will. But in the meantime, we'll call on William Burchill. And before William comes on, we might bring up a poll, Liam, if you have the poll ready. If not, I'll be interested. I'll be introducing William. So William Burchill is a dairy advisor at Teagasc Moorepark. He's on the Teagasc Dairy Gold Joint Programme. And William is going to talk to us about getting the most out of our nitrogen fertiliser. So he's going to talk a bit about less clover and using sulphur and balanced nutrients, what Jack was talking about. So our next poll is up on screen there now. So what method would you consider as the best option to reduce chemical nitrogen use on farms? So is it clover, is it low emission slurry spreading, protected urea, or building soil fertility to increase nitrogen use efficiency? So you can be filling out that poll as William is coming on. And just to tell you as well, the papers from the event will be on the Farmers Journal this week. And we're recording the webinar now, but I'd encourage you to keep your questions coming in. As you saw, quite a few questions came in for Jack, and we didn't get to all of them yet, but we'll get to them at the end of the panel discussion. So keep filling them in at the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. Okay, William.
Okay, thanks very much for the introduction, Siobhan. Can you all see my screen there now, Siobhan, and everything? Is it okay?
Yeah, we can see there now, William.
Okay, so I'll just close off the poll there. So look, thanks very much for the introduction, and look, I think Jack has really set a great scene for the start of this webinar. I'm going to maybe kind of continue on where Jack took off and look at some of the strategies that we could look at to reduce our reliance on nitrogen fertilizer on our farms. Okay, so like as Mark alluded to, and what Jack alluded to, there is some serious challenges facing us regarding nitrogen use on our farms. And I suppose they're culminating in water quality challenges, greenhouse gas emission challenges, ammonia emissions. And I suppose one thing that we must consider and that's important is that nitrogen use is actually very strongly linked to all of those challenges. And like as Jack outlined, you know, there is the EU Green Deal there, and that's proposing a 20% reduction in fertilizer in use. So like, where is that going to culminate, and where is the rubber going to hit the road in terms of our nitrogen allowances if those reductions are going to come into play? Okay. So just on the table here below, look, we've got you know, the nitrogen allowances depending on your organic nitrogen stocking rate. Okay, so there's a few figures on that table. Okay, so they will just focus in on one stocking rate band, so just to follow through the figures. Okay, so let's say if we're stocked at somewhere between 171 to 210 kilos of organic nitrogen per hectare, which look in old money in terms of livestock units is kind of around at 2 to 2.5 livestock units per hectare. It's slightly less now when we look at that new figure of the 89 kilos of in per cow. Like what that means and what our allowance there then for the whole farm is 225 units of nitrogen per acre. Okay, look, you know, if we look at what if there was a standard reduction in every single allowance based on the Green Deal's 20%, you know, that 225 units would go down to 180 units. But maybe something that we need to be looking at and focusing on in the next couple of years is maybe as a starting point, look at a 10% reduction in fertilizer in. Just start to reduce our reliance on chemical in fertilizer, start to wean ourselves off it a small bit just to begin with. So maybe go from our 225 units of nitrogen per acre down to 202, okay? And if we look at some of the strategies and some of the things that could be done in order to achieve a 10% reduction, okay? So if we are going to reduce our reliance on chemical in fertilizer, probably the first thing we actually have to do is stop thinking about chemical in fertilizer, okay, as our only nitrogen source on farms. You know, we're going to have to maybe come around to a more holistic approach regarding nitrogen on our farms and trying to get the best out of all sources of nitrogen that are available on our farms, okay? And like within that, look, you know, chemical in fertilizer is still going to be obviously going to be extremely important and a very important input of nitrogen fertilizer, but we're going to have to improve the efficiency of its use. You know, our fertilizer nitrogen use efficiency, okay? We're going to have to try and get more nitrogen from the soils, you know, similar what Jack was alluding to there in terms of soil health, getting the soil biology right. We're going to have to get more nitrogen from slurry, and I think the poll showed up some very interesting results on that. And also we're going to have to look at maybe another option that's there is to get additional nitrogen onto our farms via clover as well. And like, I suppose within all of those then, a new metric that we should be looking at and I suppose ranking and benchmarking ourselves on should be nitrogen use efficiency, or NUE down here. And that's basically looking at how efficiently we use nitrogen on our farms, you know, and there's a new metric on that, and we'll work through that. And we work through all of these as we go down through the talk. So just to start off, like, you know, we have to kind of ask ourselves, like, you know, like, what is our fertilizer in strategy, you know, and where have we been and where are we going to with it? And, you know, what are some of the things we have been doing in the past, okay, and what we need to do now maybe in the future, okay? So like, I'm just going to put up these few examples here, just showing, you know, a typical paddock maybe with number of grazing rotations, grazing dates, rotation lengths. I know some of the dates we typically spread fertilizer and slurry and how we would spread that, or it's going to be a blanket or following the cows. So maybe going back along, the thinking was that we'll spread our slurry, you know, for example, here on the 25th of January, but then, you know, we'll actually still go on and spread bag fertilizer soon after. You know, typically, like, maybe we weren't accounting for the nitrogen in our slurry. There's going to be a major thinking is going to have to change around there, and I think the poll results have shown that that change is occurring already, which is very positive. Another area I think that we're going to have to look at is, you know, we might have kind of had this old thing or this old kind of advice that we'll follow the cows with a bag of nitrogen per acre during the mid-season. And look, that might have been okay a number of years ago when we had maybe longer rotation lengths, and maybe when we had a less number of grazing rotations during the year, a less number of grazings in our paddocks during the year. But like, you know, like as Jack has mentioned, you know, I'm looking at things like pasture base, like grassland management has improved like dramatically on farms the last number of years. We've shorter grazing rotations, and we have, you know, we're having a larger number of grazings during the year. So like our old strategy that was probably might have been there before, it's not going to work if we're going to be aiming to have 9 and 10 grazing rotations during the year. We're going to have to, if our grazing management has changed and improved, our practices around nitrogen is going to have to change and improve, okay? So just say, for example, like, what should the strategy be now? And I know that lots of people are doing this already, and it's very positive, okay? So just say for the start of the year, you know, we're going to use that slurry as that first nitrogen application during the year. Like any ground that gets that slurry, it doesn't need that first 23 units of nitrogen during the year. Like, that's something that came up very strongly on the poll there. And we'll go into that in a bit more detail. And like in general, we have that target where we will apply, say, 70 units of nitrogen by the 1st of April. But the changing in that we must make sure and be very clear about that 70 units of both slurry nitrogen and bag nitrogen together it's not 70 units of bag nitrogen on top of slurry as well. No, so that'll help us to save nitrogen in the spring. And also as well, another thing that we have to do is that if we're managing our grass better now, we're having shorter rotations. So our fertilizer applications during the mid-season will have to reflect those shorter rotations. So like, you know, a very good rule of thumb to follow is that, you know, whatever your grazing rotation length is, you shouldn't use that and match that as your units of nitrogen per acre application rate. So if we're kind of on a 22, 23 rotation, you know, 22, 23 units of nitrogen per acre when we're following the cows. And that'll ensure we're spreading around the units of nitrogen per day. And like that's enough nitrogen. And like as Jack alluded to, and as you know, as Deirdre Hennessy alludes to in previous presentations as well, if we are finding that we're causing an awful lot of extra surplus bales during the mid-season, you know, maybe it's an area that we have to look at, are we spreading too much nitrogen after the cows? I think that sort of a strategy and that sort of an example is fitting in with that 225 units of nitrogen per acre, okay? So then just looking forward, you know, if there is going to be, you know, if we are going to try and look at a 10% reduction strategy first, you know, to just get ourselves used to this first maybe and start chipping away at this bit by bit. You know, a proposed strategy would be that we won't change the spring a massive amount. We'll still use our slurry. We'll still spread our 70 units there maybe at the start of the year, but using slurry as a source of nitrogen. The big area that might possibly come in is to look at our nitrogen fertilizer application strategies during the mid-season. And I'll explain why we would look there and maybe what possible sources of other nitrogen we could use to offset the reduction in chemical fertilizer, okay? So just to go back to the springtime and that slurry, and you know, and that was a very interesting one on the poll there. If we look at it here, we can see the values of nitrogen that are in 1,000 gallons of slurry, depending on the application technique we use and the timing then. So the two of these are two key things we can do to get more nitrogen out of our slurry. So just say if we take an example, say we were spreading our slurry with a splash plate in the summertime, we will be getting 3 units of nitrogen per 1,000 gallons. If we change our management and start spreading the same slurry with a dribble bar or a trailing shoe, and we spread it in the springtime, instead of getting 3 units, we'll get 9 units of nitrogen per 1,000 gallons. So basically we're tripling the amount of nitrogen that we're getting out of our slurry, okay? Like they're the type of things we're going to have to be doing if we're going to reduce our reliance on chemical in fertilizer. So just like to take that forward, like just to say like, what would that look like? Say for, this would be an example here now for a 100-acre farm, stocked at a cow to the acre. So like that farm would typically be producing around 120,000 gallons of slurry. You know, if one is spreading with the splash plate in the summertime and the other is spreading with low emissions in the springtime, you can see there on the screen, you know, what level of units they're getting per 1,000 gallons. And you can see there coming down towards the bottom, like the huge difference in terms of the amount of nitrogen that will supply. You know, if we relate that back to tons of canned fertilizer. So 0.7 of a ton of can versus 2 tons of can. So like that's a huge extra amount of nitrogen coming from our slurry, you know, and that can be used in the springtime, most definitely. So that's the springtime. The other part of the year then that we might focus in on would be the mid-season then. You know, what can we use there to reduce our chemical nitrogen fertilizer requirement? So this graph here just typically shows the green line there is showing the requirement of the grass for nitrogen during the year, and you see there it follows the typical grass growth curve, okay? The red line then is showing you know, typically what nitrogen would be supplied for the grass from soil nitrogen, okay? So that's the nitrogen being released from the soil organic matter by the soil biology, okay? And some of the reason why we might focus on the second half of the year will be the fact that, you know, as our soil temperatures warm up during the year, the release of nitrogen increases. And if we look at just say there around the August period there, you know, the background nitrogen coming from the soil can account for up to 25 to 33% of the nitrogen requirement for grass growth, okay? But like, that's not a given, okay? We don't get that for nothing, and we have to manage that, and we have to look at our practices that will maximize that on each of our individual farms, okay? And how we maximize that soil nitrogen release, and also how we maximize our, you know, our chemical fertilizer and efficiency is a very old, tried and tested strategy. And that basically is our soil sampling and our nutrient management planning. Like Jack alluded to, like, we must start using our soil samples. And I think we also have to start soil sampling a lot more regularly, maybe every second year. You know, once we get our soil samples, we really have to act. We must be aggressive with lime. We must get it out. It's the absolute foundation of getting, you know, nitrogen release from the soil and getting the efficiency from the fertilizer. We also have to apply our P's and K's according to our soil sample results, and we must apply our sulfur as well and apply our P's and K's at the appropriate times during the year. You know, it's about getting that balance right between the nitrogen, the P, the sulfur, and the lime as well. That will all help to improve the efficiency of the nitrogen fertilizer and also the background soil nitrogen release. Just when we're on this slide as well, and just a typical thing, just say for this time of the year, you know, it's important to realize that, you know, that background soil nitrogen release, that's there, and that keeps grass growing over the winter and in the early spring before fertilizer or slurry is applied, okay? And typically now, this example here, the soil nitrogen will support a grass growth rate of around 8 kilos of grass dry matter per hectare per day. So, you know, if we have new models now within Moorepark and within Teagasc that are predicting grass growth for the week ahead, you know, Ellie Burchill is doing a lot of work on that. And if we look and keep an eye on soil temperatures and look at that grass growth prediction and see that that grass growth prediction is going above that 6, 7, 8 kilos, you know, that's a very good indication now that this is a good time now to start applying our spring nitrogen or start applying our slurry in order to boost and promote grass growth in levels.
Sorry, William, just we might another 2 minutes or so, and then we'll get to questions.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, okay. So that's the nitrogen side of it and the soil nitrogen. You know, clover is also another very important source. You know, it can fix large amounts of nitrogen that can help to replace chemical in fertilizer. I suppose what's important to point out regarding the clover is that we do need a good level of sward clover content. Like typically you can see that as sward clover content increases, the nitrogen supplied by the clover also increases. So like, you know, we should be targeting around that 25 to 30% sward clover content to get good levels of nitrogen from the clover. And the supply of nitrogen from the clover also varies across the year. You know, in the springtime, clover contents are low, soil temperatures are low. But as the year progresses and soil temperatures increase, clover content increases and the nitrogen supply by the clover increases. So that's why we're talking about that kind of second half of the year, where the clover can come into its own there and help to reduce the reliance on chemical and fertilizer. So if we do all those things right, okay, what we will do is improve our farm gate nitrogen use efficiency, and that will be an important metric going forward. And basically, look, what that metric is, or what it measures and what it looks at is, it looks at all of the nitrogen entering the farm, the fertilizer lorry, the meal lorry, you know, stock coming onto the farm. And every year, a proportion or percentage of that nitrogen that enters the farm also leaves the farm in milk and stock sales. like at the moment, about 25% of the nitrogen that enters farms, dairy farms in Ireland, leaves the farms in milk and stock. And our target going forward as an industry is to try to lift that from 25% to 35%. And if we do all of the things above, that will help to lift our farm gate in use efficiency. So look, just the take home messages, look, we have to double down our efforts in terms of soil fertility. It's going to control and help us in a huge amount of things. We need to get and realise the nitrogen value in our slurry. Also, in terms of our fertilizer inefficiency, you know, we have to have an appropriate strategy for our fertilizer regarding our application rates and our timings, and you know, that has to be maximised. We have to get the best out of every unit we spread. And finally, then maybe a fourth step, then, you know, there's enormous potential for clover to supply a huge amount of nitrogen to replace chemical in fertilizer. And that's something that we need to maybe to look at and embrace going forward. So with that, I'd like to thank you very much.
Thanks very much, William. Great presentation. We'll come to the poll in a minute, but first, I just see someone coming in here on the questions, and they complimented you on your talk. And they just said care is needed when spreading slurry in the springtime. Most people focus on the calendar dates. Could you outline the other site conditions should be considered when spreading slurry? So frozen or waterlogged soils, risk of water pollution occurring. So, you know, we saw plenty of people there in the last while spreading on the frozen ground, spreading when there was snow, and, you know, maybe storage is a problem here, but what do you suggest, William?
Well, yeah, look, you know,
William,
I think we need
take
to
down
have...
your slideshow as well too, please, William. Sorry, if you just take down your slideshow too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. So yeah, no, look, we need to have enough slurry storage on farms, really, like I say, you know, because like if our chemical fertilizer in is reduced and we have to get more nitrogen from our slurry, we must be spreading it when we're going to get a good grass growth response to it. That's going to be vitally important. Like, and also another thing that we need to maybe be conscious of as well is you know, we have to maintain our buffer zones as well when we are spreading slurry at the start of the year. For the first 2 weeks after the opening period, you know, there's a buffer zone there of 10 meters from any water course. You know, and that's a substantial area, and that's, you know, that's going to be a good thing that can be used so that at least we're maximizing the slurry nutrients within the field, while at the same time helping to reduce the losses from, you know, the parts of the field that might be close to a water course.
Yeah. And I suppose people need to look at the weather forecast for the next few days ahead. I hear bucket and rain outside the window here at the minute, so it's they need to be looking at every factor that's going to affect. Someone else came in here. Bulk nutrient values of slurry need to be examined. Do people need to be testing their slurry?
Yeah, definitely, Siobhan. And like, I work on the Teagasc Dairy Gold Joint Programme, and I work with a number of discussion groups in that area. And we've had a major drive this year, and there's been massive interest among dairy farmers in our groups to get slurry tested. You know, because if we look at it, you know, if our requirement for first cut silage is 100 units of potash, and we're spreading 3,000 gallons of slurry, now, some slurry will have 30 units, 35 units of potash per 1,000 gallons. And if we spread out 3,000 gallons, we'll meet our requirement fine. But, you know, if we have more water-free slurry, there might only be 20 units. If we apply 3,000 gallons, that's only 60 units. So, like, the nitrogen we spread for that silage then will be compromised. Then, you know, we won't get that efficiency. So, you know, a slurry testing, it's very cheap. You know, maybe 50 to 70 euros a sample. And also, you know, if your system doesn't change much from year to year, you know, that slurry sample can be very representative over a long number of years.
You can't manage what you don't measure. So soil sampling and slurry testing and grassland grass measuring as well. I'll just ask you one more question before we show up the poll, and we'll get back to the other questions at the end. Is over sowing clover successful, or is a full reseed a better option? So there's a lot of people probably out there, you know, they're not going to go reseeding the whole place at the minute, and they're going to do it over time. So is that a good option? for farmers?
So what I've been hearing in terms of experience from farmers that I've been talking to in my own groups is that, you know, reseeding is definitely the first preference choice in terms of getting clover into the seed, into the sward. An important thing to note, like, is that if you are trying to establish clover, you should be targeting to have at least 1 kilo of clover seed in your bag of grass seed mixes, okay?
Yeah.
Oversowing then, look, to be honest with you, the success of oversowing is very variable across farms. There's a huge amount of factors in terms of prevailing weather conditions, soil conditions, and sward conditions. So typically what you'll be aiming for is an open sward, late April, early May, still have a bit of a moisture in the ground, and to be applying 2 kilos of clover seed per acre. And you know, you will have to try to reduce the fertilizer on that, definitely, to help to reduce the competition from the grass when them young clover seedlings are trying to establish.
Okay, and just to give you the results of the poll there, and you might have a comment on it, William. So it was, what method would you consider as the best option to reduce chemical N on your farm? So build soil fertility to increase N efficiency, 61%. Clover is only 20%, so we're hearing a lot about clover, but yet only 20% are coming back using less and protected urea. What do you think, William?
Well, you know, I'm very happy with those results, Siobhan, because I think I'm glad the farmers have said that, because the first step to establishing clover on your farm is to get the soil fertility right first. You know, that's the first major step. You know, perennial ryegrass is susceptible to poor soil fertility, but clover is much more. So the first initial step is build your soil fertility, maximize the slurry, maximize your fertilizer, and then the next step in is clover.
Okay, very good. Right, thanks, William. We've loads more questions there for you. We'll get to some of them in the panel discussion. And while Donal is getting ready there, I'll introduce him, and Liam will bring on the poll there at some stage. But I'll give Donal an introduction first. So Donal Sheehan is a dairy farmer. He's from Castlelyons in County Cork, and he's one of the people involved in running the Bride project. There's Donal on your screen now. Hi, Donal. And he's also involved in the Danu farming group, and is putting a huge emphasis on reducing nitrogen fertilizer. So our next poll, you can give 4 answers to this poll, so it's a bit of a long one. So on farm, which methods to reduce nutrient losses have you tried to date? So buffer zones, fencing water courses, cambering roadways. Of course, there's some of these we should all have done under regulations anyway. Don't worry, I don't think Jack can see your answers. Nutrient management planning, improving soil fertility, testing slurries, seeking advice from an advisor, reducing spring N application, increased storage for slurry, and calibrating your spreader. So you can be answering the poll away there. Donal, we'll go to you now. Can you share your screen? And I'll log off.
Okay. Thanks very much, Siobhan. Can you see that?
We can, yeah.
Always important. Thanks very much to Mark and the Irish Fertilizer Association for the opportunity to speak. So my talk is transitioning to a more sustainable way of farming, and I suppose the key word there is more, because there's a long road ahead of us, but we're all trying to get to that place where we are maybe farming more efficiently, not just economically, but environmentally as well. And I just want to say at the start that, you know, I'm a very ordinary farmer. I'm the very same as anyone else, but I do focus an awful lot on trying to improve the things that have to do with the environment. And I suppose I have a kind of a passion for that. I don't know why. I suppose it's just a bit of a challenge, and it's just the next step after kind of starting your farm out. You know, production-wise, environment is hugely important, as you all know. So the word sustainable, I got a bit of a rap in the knuckles about this there a couple of months ago on another Zoom call, when they said that, you know, the word sustainable is bandied around too much in sustainable farming. And you know something, actually, I would agree. We do tend to use it kind of very loosely. So if you can see behind the icon there, it's the long-term net consequences locally and globally on the environment that include habitat, biological diversity and all the rest of it. And the long-term net consequences locally and globally on personal and social well-being. So, you know, all the things that we do, are we going to leave an impact? Environmentally, probably not on ourselves, but it's kind of death by 1,000 cuts. It's our children and their children after us that will be affected environmentally. The wheels won't come off the cart all of a sudden, but bit by bit they will if we don't make changes. So just to give you a bit of background, I'm a dairy farmer, but I'm a beekeeper also, and we were always very intensive. At least I feel we were intensive anyway. More so years ago, I suppose. And I was always focused on production and getting the most out of production on the farm, and making sure the costs were as low as possible. You know, making sure I used every square inch of land. And my father was a beekeeper, and I never had much to do with it until, you know, he retired from farming and he took up beekeeping even more so. But then he retired from beekeeping and he left it to me to decide whether I, you know, continue with it or not. And I did, and again, the focus was on the same, you know, getting as much honey as possible. And not that we were selling it, but it was always nice to have your own honey. Anyone, whoever opened a beehive, and you see the sight before you of lovely honey and pollen coming in, bees buzzing around, the aroma of pollen and nectar and propolis and so on. It's a beautiful thing. It's nature, and it's a feast for the senses there in front of you. So when I started focusing and trying to get more honey, I could see that you know, spraying field margins and spraying around hedgerows and cutting hedgerows and all that was detrimental, because, you know, you get your honey from wildflowers. And it was that kind of a mindset that made me change to having a bit more balance on my farm, and having a bit more tolerance of all the things that we don't like, you know, and I suppose anything that was against production before was a non-runner, whereas now I'd see it differently. Sorry, just trying to get the next.
Your time, Donal. Yeah, you're working there now.
Okay, so following on from what was said earlier on Jack's talk on the Green Deal, this is my take on it. This is as a farmer who's involved with the Bride project and the Danube project, and I'll just explain briefly. The Bride project, I suppose, simply, we deal with the biodiversity overground, and the Danube project deals with the biodiversity underground. And my first half of the talk will feature just the talk on the 10%, the area for nature, and the second half will feature on the 90%. And if you can see that the word in red there is the minimum, that's what we need to get to have 10% of our area for nature. And you have to remember that this is the area that gives us the ecosystem services. This is the area that delivers on biodiversity, that delivers on carbon sequestration, and that delivers on water quality. It's the buffer strips, the ponds, the hedgerows, all of the habitats, the woodland that you'll get in a farm. And you know, we try to get every farmer in the Bride project up to 10%, and the average is 13%. So I just want to give you a very few quick slides on how to improve biodiversity on farm. So this is my own farm actually, and it's ground that I only acquired a few years ago, and it was in continuous tillage. And straight away when I got it, I said I'm going to try and have at least 10% in biodiversity, and also trying to improve the quality of it. And this is exactly what the Bride project tries to do. So so first of all, you have the headland, that's your hedgerows, and this is what we do in the Bride project now to try and bring farmers up to that 10%. So that's worth 4,560 square meters. So, and then you add the green is the field margin, so we're looking for a 2-meter field margin. And that will give you another 6,076 square meters. So bit by bit, and there's only a small bit there now, you haven't taken anything out of the field yet, and you're getting your BMA up a nice bit. So there's a tree line gone in down here on the bottom. That's 415 square meters. And over here on the left hand side, we put in some wild bird cover, and that's 2 acres. And yeah, that is pinching 2 acres off of 60. But to me, that's worth it. And a lot of our farmers have put this in, and they said it's the most enjoyable part of their farming, because all the kids go out and they'll see the bumblebees and the pollinators and so on. And it's a kind of a therapeutic area, if you like. So that adds another 4,815 square meters, maybe not for everybody. And then in the yellow area here, and this is what we call a skylark plot. And if you're really going to focus on biodiversity, you need to start bringing back areas, small little plots like this. This is just biodiverse grassland. It's different to the grassland that will be here. It's dealing with, it's giving a habitat really to ground nesters. So that's 7,040 square meters. And by the way, you can still graze this now. So this will be part of the grazing platform, but a different rotation linked in a different management. Then we put in 2 ponds. There's 200 square meters, again, small little bits and pieces here and there. We put in, that was just rough grassland. There was trees there already, and we just fenced off an area of rough grassland, and that's good for kestrels and barn owls and so on. So that added 1,000 square meters. And you must see now that in the center, you still have most of your farmed area. And then down below in the bottom left-hand corner, we put in an oak woodland. This was a quarry, and you can decide what you want to do with a quarry yourself. But because there's very little woodland in this area, we put in an oak woodland. So there's 320 square meters of 300 oak trees, a mixture of oak and other native deciduous trees gone in there. And down in the bottom corner, there's wet grassland. That was just always wet, and the farmer previous to me could never do anything with it, and I didn't want to do anything with it because I wanted a bit of wet grassland. It's an extra habitat, and we all focus on the Bride project, and the more habitats you have, the more BMA you'll have, the more quality you have, etc., etc. So in total, I'm after getting my BMA up to 29,427 square meters. That's 2.94 hectares, and that's 12%. And then you can add these small little bees here. These are bee scrapes, so you're adding to the quality again, you're adding to the habitats. These are just scrapes on the south-facing banks in the hedgerows. And these 2 little green leaves are here. These are 2 nettle patches. Maybe not for the faint-hearted, but the nettle patches there's 5 species of butterfly dependent nettle patches. So they're gone in as well. And again, you can just see that just small little bits and pieces, and you can make major improvements. So getting back to the Green Deal, so what I try to do is the remaining 90% of the farm is in food production, and it's trying to really get that colour orange into the colour green really, and trying to work on the soil, and that's the next part of the presentation is to do with the soil. And I'm involved in the Danube project as one of 12 farmers, and what we're trying to do is really just delve into the soil, and it's something I hated. I just never was comfortable dealing with soil because we never knew anything about it in college, and you know, discussion groups don't mention it. It's really something that was totally new to me, but it was just a matter of grasping the nettle and finding out what's going on down there and see how it reflects on the way you farm. So this is a soil analysis report that I took in 2018. And it's just giving you the pH, the P and K. It's a Morgan's test, and it's you know, it'll tell you the index and so on. But this year we have 4 plots in the Danube project. They're just small 1 hectare plots. One is just a standard treatment. The other is adding a carbon source. And the other one is a foliar application, and then a compost tea, kind of a biological treatment. I'm not going to go into that, but what I did to show with my whole farm based on the 4 trial plots was I went and I got what's called an Albrecht test, and it's not cheap now, but it gives you a really a lot more detail of what's going on down there, and what you need to do with your soil. So this is the top half of it there, and it's just get the slide off. And so if you just look at the total exchange capacity, and I'm not going to go into the detail now, but it's a key measure of the soil's ability to hold and exchange soil nutrients. So you're looking for a figure, you're given a figure here of 9.16, and it's a bit low, it needs to be up to 10 to 15, but it tells you that on a scale that your soil is either good for holding nutrients and exchanging it, or it's not, and you can work on that. Then the other target down here is the total carbon per hectare. It gives you the organic carbon. So if what was found was 58, but what was required was 75. So I know that I can actually sequester more carbon in my soils with that figure, and that's a really good figure to have, and it's a good figure to be able to showcase as Irish farmers going forward. So it's really kind of delving more into the soil really, and not just focusing on a couple of elements. So my magnesium levels in the soil were low, and last year we put out Kieserite, which is a magnesium sulfate fertilizer, and potash is low, so sulfate of potash is what was planned from the Danu project. So we might be cutting back on nitrogen, but we're kind of increasing magnesium. Phosphate was also low, and I just, oops, sorry. So if you take this slide here, and this figure here is the phosphate that's in the soil reserves. This is what came out of the soil test. So there's 1,486 kilos per hectare of phosphorus inside in the soil, but I'm not able to utilize it because of because of the way the soil is. So my calcium is good and my magnesium was low. So I'm bringing up the magnesium. I need to bring up the potassium, and the sodium was also high. These are the desired figures here, and so I'm working on getting the balance right, so that I won't have to be putting out phosphorus because it's in the soil already. But I just need to be able to get to a situation where the plants can utilize it. And that is the key. That's the way the Danu project works. That's what all the farms are trying to do, getting their soil to that place where they're utilizing the nutrients that are in the soil already, and reducing the nutrients that we're buying in. It gives you structural comments, and it gives you plant health comments. And you know, if the plant, this is one of what I found out from the Danu project is, if the plant isn't right, it's going to affect your stock. You know, we are what we eat, and that's the same for our stock and our crops.
Donal, you have 2 minutes there now.
Okay. Thanks, Siobhan. So again, it does also trace elements. So it's low on copper and it's low on zinc, and part of that might be to include those in future applications. So this is the earthworm count. So these are all the farmers in the Bride project, are in the Danu project, and it's the juvenile and the adult worms that were found in a test sample of, it's just a spade, a width of a spade all around. What you notice from this is just the variance. It's 12 and 13 in a sample up in the top, all the ways down to 0.85 or 0 even. And we just have to ask ourselves the question, you know, how can we get more earthworms into each of those samples? And that's what, again, what we're trying to achieve. So just, this is species-rich grassland, and this is what was there, I suppose, 100 years ago everywhere. And this is kind of tying in with biodiversity overground and biodiversity underground. So you add fertilizer or sprays to that, and it changes the whole composition of the soil. And the grasses that are there, and the wildflowers that are there, and all the pollinators and the invertebrates that depend on them, they'll disappear once you start changing the phosphorus and other elements, and increase the nitrogen, because the wildflowers, they don't like phosphorus and they don't like nitrogen, and it just it lends itself to a grass habitat rather than a wildflower habitat. And I know you know, this is not for everybody, but I'm just showcasing of what needs to be done to retain kind of valuable habitats like this, and that's what you get then. That's probably just my own field. The other one wasn't. That's just intensive grassland. So you can see very clearly how we've lost so much habitats, and it's not just you know, it's not over fertilization. It's just, this is the drive for agricultural intensity and food production. Just going on from to buffer strips. This is a buffer strip, and there's actually no strip here. This is what I want to showcase with this slide. You can see where you know there's nutrients going right into the edge here, and there's you can see the invasive species there, giant hogweed. You can see where the cows are damaging the soil, so that lends itself again to more giant hogweed next year. So, you know, fencing off a 3-metre buffer strip is what we recommend in the Bright project. And it's not a silver bullet to reducing nutrients. Reducing nutrients and excess nutrients is a matter of just cutting back the fertilizer, end of story. The buffer just helps to stop sediment going in more than anything else, and it's good for biodiversity. And this is our score sheet. You've heard a lot about score sheets. This is the way the Bright project would score a riparian buffer strip, and we have scorecards for every single habitat that you'd find in the Bright Valley or anywhere else. So the most of the score and the payment would go, if you haven't got the 3 meters, you won't get the payment, you won't get a high score. And then if it's free from disturbance, you go down to the bottom right-hand corner there, you see disturbances. Any disturbance to a riparian buffer strip is really an auto fail, whether it's a farmyard runoff, fertilizer application, pesticide application, because, you know, the water is what we're all drinking, and that's and it's a premium habitat as well, so there's a higher payment because it's a premium habitat. So I've switched from I haven't switched. I'm toying with the idea of liquid nitrogen, foliar nitrogen. I've used it already and it's working very well. You can really cut back the rates. But the problem for me is I haven't got a sprayer, and I'm toying with the idea of seeing if it would be workable on a rolling basis, and making that transition to bring in infrastructure like, you know, a tank and buying a sprayer. But certainly the foliar applications or the liquid soil applications seem to be way more efficient than granular applications. And I'm also skeptical about protected urea. Actually, I just at this point now where I'm trying to look after my soils, and I would have an issue with putting an inhibitor in there when I'm just trying to get my soil sorted and get them moving and getting them utilizing the nutrients that I'm looking to get in there. One of the other things is a multi-species sward. They've put in multi-species swards, and, you know, this is very much in its infancy, but it's a high clover, there's chicory, there's 5 or 6 herbs, there's a couple of different species of grasses gone in there, so that all your eggs aren't in the one basket. If you have a drought or if you have excess rain, you know, a lot of those species should hold, and you have better diversity above ground and you have better diversity below ground. So to summarize, the changes that I've made to improve environmental sustainability, or some of them anyway, I have increased stock numbers, because when we got that land across the road I was talking about, I actually decreased the stocking rate, even though I increased the stock numbers. And we were always very tight in the home block. And the very minute that I got a bit of extra land, I didn't want to put myself through the hassle again of always being tight with numbers and being tight with fodder. So we just cut back the stocking rate a small bit, even though we did increase the stock numbers. We changed from a splash plate now, it's low emission slurry spreading. We put in an additive now in the slurry, and that is it's not just help the agitation, but it also improves the nutrient value of the slurry, at least it's supposed to, outside in the field, and we'll see how that works this year. Reseeding with multi-species sward. I'm really honing in on the target nutrient use for individual fields, and knowing what I'm using on the home block, especially by where the dairy is, and that's all those nutrient use now is based on that Halbach soil test. An increased focus on improving the soil biology, that's in conjunction with the Danu project, finding out what's happening underground and putting in the proper nutrients, and only the nutrients that is required, and trying to get the nutrients that are in the soil working to my benefit. The issue with protected urea, and then possibly changing off to liquid nitrogen use rather than granular, but that'll have to suit me first and foremost, and it'll have to be convenient. So, okay, Siobhan, that's it. Thanks very much.
Well done, Donal. Great presentation. Really interesting. Sorry, I start my video. Loads of compliments coming in here on the questions. Inspiring presentation coming in here on a lot of the questions. Just looking at some of them, and we'll go to the poll before we ask the other Jack and William to come on. your liquid N source, where are you getting that? I know a lot of merchants have liquid N available, and even have, you know, they have people available to spread it.
Yes, so it's actually mixing urea with a carbon source and molasses. That's what I'm using at the moment. But I'm looking at the liquid nitrogen is available locally, and it can be delivered. But again, it's just making that change. You know, it's the infrastructural change. It's so convenient just to go down and get granulated down to the local co-op, and it's deciding on that infrastructural change really. And because it's a big decision, you know, that, but you know, we know that the granular fertilizer is hugely inefficient, the granular nitrogen fertilizer, and there must be better options out there.
Okay. There's a lot of questions coming in on slurry additives, and how you find them. Are they increasing your earthworm numbers? What effect do you think they're having on your slurry?
Yeah, so I don't know yet, Siobhan, because this is the first winter I've used them. But with regard to slurry applications, I do try and limit the slurry applications to 1,500 gallons per acre, and the contractor hates it because it's not always possible, especially at this time of the year when ground can be heavy. But I'd be hoping that there would be some added value to the additive that's gone into the slurry, and just keeping it at that 1,500 gallons per acre. Little and often I see with slurry, and making sure you're not going back on the same field later on the year, knowing where they've got to.
Yeah. You've included multi-species swards on your farm. How have they worked in terms of nitrogen fertilizer management and your milk production? So have you seen a difference in your solids, or?
No, there isn't enough of them. I started in 2017, and we just put in chicory, and the thing with the chicory sward is that it's still surviving, it's still there. But where I took a second cut silage, it's a lot stronger, because I'd say it was getting a chance to reseed. You know, it was getting a chance to seed and get back into the ground. Last year we put in a higher content of herbs and grasses, and that's the real multi-species sward, and it's fantastic. There was no nitrogen out in it last year, but I think that was because I ploughed it, and it got a lot of nitrogen out of the sward. I hadn't burnt off the sward, and it never looked like it was low in nitrogen, so it didn't get nitrogen. But you have to wait and see. Like there's a lot of clover in the sward, and the important thing now is to just discipline myself to cut back the nitrogen and make sure that I'm getting the best benefits out of that, out of utilizing that sward.
Yeah, and I'll just ask you one more question, Donal, before we give up the poll results. How has your farm performance and your profitability been affected by the changes that you've made? Now, I know it's an ongoing process.
Yeah. It hasn't. I mean, this is the whole thing, Siobhan. The wheels can't fall off the cart. Like, you know, there's no point in kind of rewilding your farm if you're not going to make an income. Like, I'm a full-time dairy farmer. The main income is from, you know, the dairy enterprise. So I'm just pinching as much as I can. And ultimately, I mean, Jack alluded to it there in his presentation, when the results-based payments will come out in the EIPs, and there's several other EIPs are doing results-based payments, you're getting to a situation then where you can decide what farmers are, or what level of biodiversity they're at. We're able to measure now what level of biodiversity is on a farm, the quantity of it and the quality of it. And then you actually have an accreditation at that stage. And then the next step is to go to the consumer and the processor and look for a premium for that. Yeah. So that's where we're heading, I suppose. Yeah.
Very good. Okay. Well, if Liam has the poll results, we might see. Yeah. So what methods are people using? So improve soil fertility, massive. I think all of our panelists will be happy with that. Seeking help from an advisor, nutrient management, planning. We might get some comments on that. So Jack, what do you think of those results? You're on mute there, Jack, sorry.
Sorry, yeah, thanks, Siobhan. I think they're really positive. Like, people are thinking about what they're doing. It's interesting that so many are saying they're going to improve soil fertility, or they're doing it. It's not shown true yet in soil sample results, but at least people are thinking about it. That's the important thing. And they believe people like Donal and William when they're talking. You know, that's the important thing. This is not something that's not mainstream now. This is the future of agriculture, you know. So I think farmers themselves will have to come up with ideas, and that's what's happened in the IPs with Teagasc and other, you know, there's good private advisors out there as well, and co-ops and merchants. They'll come up with localized solutions to problems. That'll be worth an awful lot.
Yeah. And Jack, like you said, this is the future and it's the way it's going. And we heard Donal talk about biodiversity there and the results-based payments. And we heard you talk about carbon sequestration earlier on and carbon credits. And there's questions coming in there, like when do you think we'll see farmers being paid for those, being paid for their biodiversity, for the benefits it's having on the environment, or being paid for carbon sequestration?
As soon as possible. But like there's NPWS had a biodiversity conference 2 years ago in Dublin Castle. And one of the ideas from it was there should be a biodiversity for business platform that would link up business with farmers like Donal and others and pay them for the biodiversity on their farm. Because there's an awful lot of companies making claims about their corporate social responsibility. And it'd be fantastic to see those investing in farmland and a reward coming back to the farmer.
Yeah.
As regards the schemes, you know, the pilot scheme it's out for consultation there, and there will be more on that over the next couple of years. And I suppose everybody should remember, anytime there's a consultation, if you have an idea, you should submit it. You know, put it in, contact the department. If you think there's a way to do things better, let us know and it'll be considered. But I know we were talking to colleagues in Holland about eco schemes, and over there, Friesland, Campina and Rabobank are paying farmers to do what Donal is talking about. And there's a huge gap here in the market that I don't understand. Why can't, and maybe there's some co-op people on, why can't they step in to up the standards on Irish farms?
Okay, yeah, and some of the co-ops are, you know, they are becoming more aware of it. They're giving sustainability bonuses on the grain or the milk, and they're putting their carbon footprints on the dockets and everything. So there definitely is progress from industry. I might stick with you, Donal, on that one. Just there was something coming in there, a few comments saying it's hard to get prices on protected urea, and maybe it's a little bit harder to source, or is it that merchants don't want to have the stock in case they're left with it, or is there enough of a push on protected urea coming from the industry? Like we saw in William's presentation there, protected urea was the whole way through the management plan. Sorry, I meant that question for Jack, Donal. Sorry.
Sorry. I think
you on the spot, Donal. Sorry.
Sorry. If there was a key message to come out of today, to me it's irrelevant what type of nitrogen you use. Reduce the amount of nitrogen. Like protected urea is excellent for ammonia, and William rightly pointed that out. But reduce the overall amount of nitrogen, because at the end of each year, all the tons sold are added up. And that tots up for the EPA to calculate our greenhouse gas emissions. So using protected urea, yes, it's excellent for ammonia, but you still need to reduce the amount of that you're using. You know, that has to be a key message from everything. So a switch on its own is not enough. It may be a step on the way, but we need to reduce the total amount of nitrogen. And I think, to be fair, Teagasc are doing a huge amount on protected urea. Every time I open the Grass 10 newsletter, you know, what more can they do?
Yeah, okay. We might get Donal and William to comment on this. So clover is a good aid for reducing your nitrogen, but it's hard to maintain, and I think, you know, everybody will agree with that. And the multi-species are hard to maintain as well. There isn't a whole lot of options available as regards clover safe herbicides, and they are expensive. So, you know, what do farmers do in that situation? William, have you any advice? And maybe Donal, you can offer your own experience.
Yeah, look, I think that, you know, that it's a very good point. That look, clover, like there will be a bit more management in clover, so it's something that we're going to have to, all of us as advisors, as in the industry, and as farmers, we're going to have to upskill ourselves on the management of clover and getting used to using it on our farms. You know, regarding the sprays, I know that it is an obstacle, particularly for this year. But look, I have heard that there is some more sprays coming available on the market in 2022. You know, and it's particularly for those clover safe sprays for reseeds as well. So you know, that's what we'll be hoping for, that they'll be coming forward. And it's, it is stepping stones to something that we will have to get used to and start talking about more within Teagasc and the advisory service and among farmers to get used to using it.
But I suppose, Donal, we don't want to be dependent on pesticides either. So how are you managing?
Yeah, well, if you're going down the road of multi-species sward, Siobhan, you know,
you've no option.
You haven't. You know, you're actually committing to no pesticides, and that is a huge difficulty. You know, you're for farmers that are used to a lovely uniform sward. You know, you're not going to have a uniform sward because you have so many different plants sticking up their heads at different times of the year. You're trying to hold on to all the species for long term. So there's going to be different management in it, possibly longer rotations, and so it's a whole new ball game. And you know, I'm only kind of getting into it. But if you're going to convert your farm over the years, it is a whole new ball game. Can I just come back to what Jack said earlier on, Siobhan? Like when we're looking for this premium, this premium, we shouldn't be going down the road of this being, you know, this needs to be a challenging premium, because we've gone down the road of kind of greenwashing, and everybody has an accreditation, whatever it is. This has to be that, you know, farmers that are improving the environment will get the accreditation, but it shouldn't be an automatic thing. And you know, paying for biodiversity with payments is all very fine, but you know, you get it no matter what. You know, the payment is for biodiversity, but you don't have to spend it on biodiversity. There's no tie-in with it. So I think from here on, we need to start showcasing that yes, we are making improvements, and we can actually document it, and it's not just ticking boxes. Yeah.
Okay. Donal, there was a question in there. What's your fear with the inhibitor, with using the inhibitor?
Well, I it's just on the soil, and I might have to use it because I've gone down to the co-op last year for ordinary urea, and it's actually easier to get the protected urea. But I just don't know enough about it. I know there's a webinar on Friday, and there's a new research update. So it's just when you're trying to sort out the soil at this stage, I just have a kind of a reluctance that maybe it's doing something to the microbiology, but I don't know enough about it. And as I said, I might not be able to go down that road. I might have to use it.
Yeah. Okay.
I might just comment on that, Siobhan.
Yeah, work on it, William.
Okay. Yeah, I know that there is some recent workouts of Johnstown Castle where, you know, there's researchers down there working on all the soil biology, and there's been some grass plots who have been receiving, you know, protected urea and can and normal urea for a number of years, and they've measured the soil biology on each of those.
Okay.
And at the moment, what they've been seeing so far is no major differences in the soil biology. But I suppose that research is just I suppose it's ongoing, like I say, but some of the initial results aren't seeing any major differences.
Very good. Okay. Question in there on spreaders. Are they being calibrated regularly enough? I suppose William and Jack might comment on that. Yeah,
I might just comment to start, Jack, that's okay. But yeah, look, I think the newer fertilizer spreaders, you know, there's better calibrations on them, definitely. And I suppose, you know, maybe before we were kind of the fertilizer was either set to the half bag, or just set to the full bag, or just set to 3/4 of a bag. But I suppose we are going to have to calibrate the spreaders a bit better. You know, if we are going to hit those targets in terms of trying to match the units of nitrogen applied to our rotation lengths, we will have to get a little bit better handle on calibrating our spreaders, and, you know, bringing down the units or up in the units in smaller increments to what we would have before, maybe.
And we should be calibrating with different batches and compounds. Jack, what do you say on that?
Yeah, I think everyone should be spreading fertilizer with a GPS unit, to be honest. There's a Thomas grant there available at the minute for all farmers. Or other than that, get a contractor in. You know, it costs about €4 an acre. Your time is better spent judging the grass and measuring it and so on, and get someone else to do the work and get it spread as accurately as possible. Because, like, there was a question there about Donal's habitats and all. It's so important that you're not throwing fertilizer into these areas that he's trying to keep. You know, that nitrogen is going out and being used properly. And it's not just a matter of if you have a little bit over going around the headland again or up and down the field. You know, it has to go out right, and it's a cost. and it's what you're going to be judged upon in the future, how efficiently you can use it. So you have to plan that way.
Okay.
Could I just add to that, Siobhan? Like from a farmer's point of view, I think there's an awful lot of confusion out there between kilos per hectare, kilos of nitrogen per cow, and units per acre. I suppose I'm a bit old school, and units per acre was always a kind of a thing that you'd have in your head. You know that 46 units per acre is a bag of urea. And if we could get to a kind of a uniform language where advisors, researchers, the department and farmers are all singing at the same hymn sheet, and that when you're talking about artificial nitrogen in particular, that if it could be done to units per acre or units per hectare, so that it's easier when a farmer has put out a bag, he knows that that's 46 units and that he's only, 150 or 200 or whatever left. But having a kind of a uniform language, I think, would be beneficial, in my own opinion, anyway.
Yeah, work on your jacket.
There's the Teagasc Nutrient Management Planner online, and I think it does exactly what Donal says. Like, it does it in kilos per hectare, but it also does it in units per acre, so you can see it. Because it is a valid point that there's so much information coming at people now, and so many different webinars even, and people are busy, but that I know that does it there, and it's available to all advisors to use as well.
And as well, the Fertilizer Association of Ireland have their app. If you log on to their website, that's a very handy app. You can put in your crop that you're growing, your yield, and your P&K index, and it'll give you advice on what to spread. We'll go through a few more questions. I know we're over time, but we're holding the crowd. So there's an evaluation form in the chat, so you might fill that out before we log off the webinar. So if you just click into the chat, anyone that's looking, and fill out the evaluation form. William, I think this one's for you. And look, you had sulphur in your management plan. Any comment on the use of sulphur in increasing NUE where sulphur is deficient? Use of sulphur has increased in Ireland over the last number of years.
Yeah, definitely. And sulphur is something that it's very important there, particularly in that kind of April, May, June period, particularly on lighter soils. So, like, a recommendation for grassland would be to apply 15 units of sulphur across April, May, and June. And sulphur is well proven that sulphur is very important within the plant. It helps nitrogen utilization within the plant, and it does increase nitrogen use efficiency. And I'd had a number of dairy discussion group clients highlighting that where they have used sulphur on silage ground, they have seen a boost and an increase in the crude protein in their silage. Maybe a 2% increase in the crude protein in their silage. So definitely it's very important, yeah.
Okay, and can the 20% reduction in nitrogen be fully offset by better N efficiency, or will there ultimately be an N deficit on farms leading to reduced grass growth? Maybe William and Donal as well, maybe my comment. Donal's kind of answered a little bit of it already.
Yeah, I can start off, Donal, if you want to comment after. Yeah, I think nitrogen efficiency will definitely bring us a portion of the way. The soil fertility, the slurry, getting more out of the soil, that will bring us a portion of the way, but there may be a gap to be filled with clover as well in terms of reaching that 20%.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that it can easily be done, I think, because we don't, when we put out slurry, the nitrogen goes out kind of the week after or whatever, and there's no count taken of what William was saying about the level of nutrients in it. It's just easier to put it out than not to put it out, and it's trying to focus on small little things like that. Another thing is following on from when we were talking about the fertilizer spreaders. It's just a pain to get out and cut back in midstream your applicator to cut it down, and the temptation is just to keep going at the rate that you're on, and all of these small things will make a difference. But we need to focus on cutting 10 units here and 10 units there, not just 1 unit, because it is easily done. Sorry, Jack.
Go on, Jack.
No, Donal, I agree with what's been said. I also think we should be, like, we're focusing on chemical fertilizer, we should be thinking about nitrogen, so crude protein in feed. There's excess being fed, it's just coming out in the urine. It's coming out at the rate of 1,000 kilos per hectare from the urine of an animal. What's the point in that? Animal breeding has a huge role to play. Yeah. So these are things that we can get more efficient animals. So it's not just nitrogen, chemical nitrogen fertilizer. It's all sources of nitrogen that we need to look at, and we can change them. We can definitely do more on crude protein and feed. Grass breeding programs are long-term, but they will cause changes. The multi-species grassland Donal talked about, it's one of the things a farmer can choose to do in New Zealand to reduce their emissions profile. You know, so, and there's always new research and new technology coming online as well. So there's lots of opportunity.
Yeah, as William said earlier, it's a holistic approach. We need to take everything into account. And if people are doing their nutrient management plans, they should be taking in that crude protein in their meal into account. Jack, just two quick ones for you. I think I know the answers to this, but will the new soil testing scheme Jack mentioned include the Albrecht test Donal was talking about? I don't think department's budget will stretch to the Albrecht soil test.
No, I don't think so. We're considering doing a Melix test. We have to talk to some more of the labs about it, but we are trying to push out, and we are going beyond what's there at the minute, you know. Okay. So who knows, in the future it may, or maybe that'd be a good idea for a scheme or quality assurance bonus or something.
Okay, yeah. And there's another question there. Go on, Donal. Sorry.
Is not. It's only once off. You know, you're getting.
Yeah.
You know, it's not an ongoing thing. Sorry.
Yeah, but things like Jack mentioned earlier on, the tissue samples
absolutely
is very important.
Yeah.
And Jack, another question on derogation. The TAMS grant is gone for the less spreaders. I think we know the answer to this anyway, but what's the department's stance on it? You can't get the grant for the less spreader if you're in derogation. Sorry. So it's
that's right.
into law now. So.
Yeah, once it becomes law, you only have 12 months under the current regulation. So anybody, like what's likely to happen, if you read Acclimatise, more and more slurry and pig slurry has to go out with low emission equipment. So you make a choice. You're either going to get the local contractor to do it or get your machine. But if you're thinking of buying the machine, the sooner the better. Like ideally, all slurry in Ireland would be going out with low emission equipment. Make best use of it, reduce our ammonia emissions.
Yeah, okay. Guys, I think we've put you through the rigor there in the questions. I'm sure we've got through a lot of the questions, and I think if we don't, some of them might have been answered by the guys in the back there. So I think if we'll ask people if they haven't filled out the evaluation to work away, but other than that, we're gone well over time, so we might bring the proceedings to a close. So I just thank all of our speakers, I suppose, first of all. So thanks to Jack, William and Donal, and thanks very much to Mark and his team, Tim Shield, David Wall, John Carroll, Paddy Casey and Damien Kelly were all working away in the background, and the committee as well, sorting through all your questions. Thanks to you, the audience, for your participation and for taking part in the polls, because the event wouldn't run as well if we hadn't audience participation. The papers from the speakers are available in this week's Farmers Journal, and there's loads of content on the Fertilizer Association's website. There's loads of activity going on despite the pandemic, and there's plenty of videos up there on soil sampling and analysing your results, and that P&K calculator is there as well for the app for your phone. So thanks very much, Mark. We might leave it to you to close out. So.
Okay, thanks, Siobhan. I think you have done a super job, and look, thank you very, very much for keeping the proceedings on track in terms of time. You've done a super job on chairing it. You've provoked debate. There's been a massive amount of questions have come in from the audience, which shows that there's a lot of interest in the whole area. I would also like to thank the three speakers again, I suppose, for their passion, their honesty, their belief, and their putting it into action. You know, Jack, William and Donal. I would also like to thank, as Siobhan has done, the committee, technical support here today to make the whole webinar happen. And finally, I would also like to thank you, the audience, for joining us in such large numbers and staying with us. There has been massive interest from the level of questions, and also the polls have, you know, they're very, very positive that there is the right attitude or approach out there to using nitrogen more efficiently going forward. So with that, I will close the webinar and stay safe. And thank you very, very much for making it such a great event.